Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2018 World Dairy Expo. Today's seminar, Entering the Dairy Industry, How Do Young People Get Started into Dairying, is the seminar we're going to start in just a few minutes. So entering the dairy industry can be a daunting task for people of any age, especially for young people. Our speaker, Gary Sipiorski, Dairy Development Manager at Vita Plus, will outline a roadmap into dynamic dairy industry for beginning farmers during this seminar. Today's discussion will include financial management and animal husbandry skills needed to be successful, in addition to possible education routes and roles internships can play. With experience on the board of directors for Citizens State Bank of Loyal and as an advisor to the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, Sipiorski will also cover how money borrowing works in a capital-intense business like dairying. He also spends time offering insights to families in the midst of generational farm transfers and as a regular writer for Horde's Dairymen. This seminar has been approved for continuing education credits from the American Registry of Professional Animal Scientists and American Association of Veterinarian State Boards. Forms for these programs are available just outside the door, so if you want to qualify for those credits, make sure you see the gals in the back. And then we ask that everyone silence their cell phones during the presentation. So I will turn the mic over to Gary.
Thank you, Katie. All right, now you might be wondering, with the dairy economy the way it is right now, why in the world would anybody want to get into this business, huh? Well, I tell you what, there are young people that want to. In fact, right up sitting in front is Ben, and he's in 5th grade. He shows cattle, and he wants to be in this business down the road someday. And you know what? Everybody in this room has a birthday sooner or later during the year, and you want to be ready for it, ready for the future, and it's good to see young people in this. But a lot of times I get questions, Gary, how do we start it? Where do we go? How do we get into this thing? Where do I begin? Fortunately, in the 30 years of banking that I've had, it's been just a real pleasure to see people start with just a few cows in some cases. I have a young dairy producer I was with here the other day. Started with 8 cows 40 years ago. Today there's 450 cows out there, and he's turned the family farm over to the next generation. And it's really good to see that. I've seen dairy producers with 80 cows. Today they're milking 2,000 cows. And you decide what's right for you. But the important thing is what we're going to talk about today is how do you start? Well, we're at the Dairy Expo. What a great place to learn about this. And here's the starting point that we need to look at. First question, and you might say, oh, Gary, this is probably a pretty obvious question. Do you like cows? And that's pretty important because sometimes, and in the past, people liked machinery because we had to do something with all that feed that we produced, so we had cows to put it through. Well, you have to like cows if you're going to be in this business, and you have to enjoy doing this kind of stuff here and working with them. Because guess how many days a year that we take care of dairy cows? Yeah, 365 days and sometimes 366 days a year, where some of the grain folks, and don't get me wrong, you people do work in the spring and the fall, and then you go south for the winter. But what's the knowledge base that you need to have? All right, maybe you're fortunate enough to have grown up on a farm. Now, not everybody has that opportunity. Some have relatives on farms. Again, these are starting points. How do you get familiar with what's going on? There's dairy producers in this room right now that have a ton of information that they've forgotten. I mean, Dick Herman's back here, and Mary Jane, and my goodness, you folks have been very successful at what you've done, and Dick says, I'll get you for that, but extremely successful at what they've done. All right, how about a neighbor's farm? I mean, at one time, in Wisconsin particularly, every quarter mile there was a farm. I mean, you all can see that when you drive some of our rural roads. And every 6 miles there was a cheese factory. And when the bus stopped, 2 and 3, 4 children got on the bus at each stop. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. But yet we've got young people that want to get into this business. Well, maybe I just like the idea. And you know what? I've seen people that have not grown up on the farm. I know a gentleman that grew up in Detroit, Michigan. And he's very successful at what he's doing in farming. And if you've ever been to Detroit, there aren't any cows in Detroit. But that's what he wanted to do because he had relatives and a farm that he could go to. And it really got into his blood. And how about in education? It's extremely important. I'm talking beyond high school. University here offers a 2-year program, farm short course. Great place to learn. Nothing wrong with a 4-year degree. Our technical colleges. In fact, I know dairy producers that have masters, PhDs, even veterinarian degrees, and they're taking care of cows. How about an internship? Especially with our 2-year program and other students that come down to the university. You know, the best education you can get is in the weekend. You go with your buddies to their farm, and you get up in the morning when they get up, and you work with them during the day, and you ask a lot of questions. That's how you find out what's going on. And those of you that are young people in this room, I really encourage you to do that and get that type of education outside of the classroom. It's extremely important. Yeah, Ben, it's important for you to be here. I know you're missing a day of school today, but you're going to pick up some things today that you're going to remember. And, you know, what's your idea of dairy farming? There's a lot of ways to do it out here, people. Sit on a board of directors of a bank. We have customers that have 12 cows. We have customers with 2,000 cows. I've consulted with people with 20,000 cows. There's a lot of ways to do it. And the important thing is what's right for you and what works. See, you can do it this way. These kinds of dairies are nice. We still have a lot of them. Clark County, northwestern part, the central part of the state, northwestern part of Clark County, there's 500 of these dairies that look just like this. We have a lot of folks that moved in from Pennsylvania, places like Ohio, and it works real well for them. How about grazers? We're going to talk about this in a few minutes. There's a really neat internship that grazers have done, and maybe that's a way to enter into this business. How about cows in a tie stall like this? That works too. We see a lot of cows still being milked in these. Yeah, we got cows being milked in these free stalls. We found out that when you talk to cows and ask them where they're most comfortable, a guy by the name of Dr. Buchholz up in Michigan, about 40 years, could talk to cows. And the cows talked back. And Herb said, "Girls, where would you like to be?" And the cows said, "We really like to be on the beach. So if we can, give us sand." And I know there's a lot of different ways to do it. But these are all alternatives and ways to milk cows. Parlors, put them in circles. Cows like this thing. They just don't want to get off. And how about the robots? We hear a lot of discussion about them right now. So there's a lot of ways. My question to those of you that want to get into this business, and those of you that maybe are looking for bringing in another generation, or maybe have a dairy facility that you'd like to have somebody come in, these are the things you need to do. All right, if you're fortunate enough to be on a family farm, you need to spend some time and really think about that. And usually, by the time young people become teenagers, their interest really starts to bubble. And you find out, parents, just how interested they are. And I'm talking to young people now. You really need to pay attention what's going on that farm. On that relative's farm again, or a neighbor's farm. And here's the plan. Wow, Gary, we're milking cows. Why do we have to write things down? There was a study done a number of years ago at an Eastern school, at a major college. And the students that sat down and had a business plan, and I'm not saying that you have to wait till you get to college before you do a business plan. You can be 10, 12 years old and get a pretty good idea or a thought of what you want to do and start putting a business plan together. And the students that wrote a business plan, we found that 3% of them had as much net worth as the rest of the class did 30 years later because they had a plan. Anybody know the name Bill Gates? Anybody know a guy over in Nebraska that does a lot of investing? Those two gentlemen were asked what was the most important thing in their careers, and they were asked that question. They were sitting on both sides of the table, and they wrote down one word. You know what that word was? Focus. They had a plan, and they focused on what they were doing. What's your strengths and weaknesses? And you need to be honest about this as young people. You need to be honest about this if you're bringing somebody into the dairy. I really like, and there are people that really like cows. Obviously, there's 9.4 million cows out here being taken care of by people every day in the United States. These are people that understand cattle and want to learn about dairy cows. I always kid people that have baby calves on the farm. And you know who the best person to take care of the baby calves are? Generally, it's the women, because they seem to have that motherly touch. But there are guys that do it. The thing I always like is the person that takes care of a baby calf, and that calf gets sick or passes away, dies, and they cry. That's somebody that really knows how to take care of animals. So what are your strengths and weaknesses? What's your goals? Again, what's the plan? Write it down. Talk to other people. How did you get where you were? I don't know if Al Kepke is going to be here this week. Probably so, but Al Kepke, a very successful dairy farmer down in the Oconomowoc area. Al told me, he says, every day when I went from the house to the barn, I asked myself, how can I make the cows more comfortable? As a young person, are you thinking about that? If you're bringing somebody on the farm, are they thinking about that? And be honest. If you prefer machinery, deal with the machinery and get involved in that. But if you're going to get in the dairy business, you got to like cows. I call it a four-legged milk stool. And you say, wait a minute, Gary, there's 3 legs on a milk stool. Well, there used to be, but today there's 4, and I'll show you why. Now, you think about these 4 legs, and you think about a good dairy producer, a good family out there, and I'll guarantee you they know all 4 of these legs. Because if you take any of these away, you'll find someone that isn't quite as successful as they could be. They know how to take care of cattle and care for them. They watch them. They almost know when they're ill a day before that happens. They have that sensitivity. That's number 1. You know how to take care of those cattle. Secondly, how to grow and buy high-quality feed. John, that's something that everybody ought to know, huh? But I tell you what, in the end of May, when maybe you shouldn't be putting up that alfalfa, and maybe you should, and you make a decision to do it, and it's quality stuff, that makes a big difference. We are in the nutrition business, our firm. But you know what we focus on first? Forage quality. The more energy and protein you can grow in the field, the less you have to buy. Remember, young people, these are things you need to look at. That's 2 legs. That doesn't stand very well. Understand the financials. Wow. Oh, now we could talk all day long on that topic. I'm talking about balance sheets. Everybody in this room, do your balance sheet on the 31st of December at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Did you spend a day or 2 before that getting your inventories together? Young people, do you understand what a financial statement is and a balance sheet and a cash flow and projections? Today, if I wasn't here, I'd be sitting on a loan committee at the bank. And you know one thing we'd be looking at? Balance sheets, cash flows, projections. And some people say, that's silly. Why do I put a projection together? I don't know what the price of milk is going to be a year from now. I don't know where my costs are. Well, you know what the historical numbers look like? Take a look at the last 3 years. Think about what you're going to do. And I know it's going to be wrong at the end of the year. But see if you can get within 10% being right. Young people, you need to understand that. Somebody came up to me before the meeting, said, I've had a couple people today said, I've read your articles, Gary. Well, I'm going to give you a plug. Or its dairymen took the articles that I've done since 1994 and they put them in a book. And they're for sale. In fact, I'm going to do a book signing on Saturday. But talking about financials, you need to understand that. Young people that are in the audience, do you know how to balance a checkbook? You know how to reconcile it? Those of you that are transferring a farm to somebody else, do they understand that kind of stuff? I sat down with a couple in California a few years ago, and this was quite a few years ago. This was in '09. Everybody remember '09? A pretty ugly year. These folks own 3 farms, 3 brothers, 3 farms, altogether 3,500 cows. In California, I mean, the average size herd in California is over 1,000 cows. And you know what these 3 brothers were about ready to do? They're about ready to buy another farm. And the husband and wife I talked to, the husband said, when we were teenagers, my parents drilled into us balance sheets and cash flows and projections. I looked at the couple and I said, now I know why you're buying a farm when people are bailing out. Because you understand the financials. What's the 4th leg? 4th leg is working with family, working with employees. Now, I want you to think about those 4 points. See, at one time we had 50 cows. Right now it takes about 75 to 100 cows to make a family living, huh? You know that? In fact, I got a question here a couple of weeks ago from some of our staff. Someone was looking at how many employees do I need to take care of my dairy, and that's about what it takes, 75 to 100 cows. Well, what happens if you have 500 cows? You can't do it by yourself. You run yourself nuts, I'll tell you that. So what you do is you have to have employees. And how do you take care of employees? I can show you farms as a lender that I sat down. First question I asked was, do you enjoy working with hired labor? And I remember one farm, and the dad said, I hate labor. I can't stand him. Well, I said, it's pretty obvious. You got 150 cows here, and you can't keep a hired person here for 6 weeks. How in the world are you going to expand this herd to 700 cows, and now you need 7 employees? I said, he says, well, we'd like to expand. I said, I won't do it with my money for your sake. And they asked me to leave. Lenders always don't have a real good day. But that was okay, if that's what those folks wanted. Sadly, it didn't work very well because somebody gave them the money, and it didn't work because they didn't know how to take care of employees. And I can show you farm after farm after farm of people that had 20 cows, 50 cows, and 80 cows, and are milking 300, 500, 600, 1,000 cows today. And there's people waiting at their door wanting to go and work for them because they know how to take care of people. Young people, the 4-legged milk stool. You know, it's always important when I put sessions on like this, is what is the take-home points? What are you going to remember when you leave? If I can leave you with something, those are the 4 points. And again, think about the successful farmers that you know, and I'll bet you all 4 of those points they've got nailed. All right, what's a balance sheet look like? You talk about capital-intense business. 10 to 25,000 invested per cow. Just think about next time you drive by a farm and you see 500 cows out there and start multiplying it. I'm not even talking about the high land values here, folks. Yeah, you're going to have some land if you're going to have dairy cows, unless you're doing it the Western way with a limited amount, and that happens in areas. We've got it in Wisconsin with large herds that buy feed, land is rented. But that's the kind of investment we have out here, people. How about renting? Think about this, young people, as you start a dairy. Where do you start? You start with the most important thing, and that's the cows. Rent a facility. Do the balance sheet, do the cash flows, do the projections, have your plans together. Lenders are looking for that plan. And we've had lots of young people come in and ask about, how do I get started? That's how you get started. And I'll show you some of the ways you can finance. Buy the cattle. Put the money in the cattle. I like old rusty pickup trucks. People drive up to the bank and they got an old rusty pickup truck and they want to borrow money for cows. That's okay. Don't drive up with a big brand new truck. Oh, it's been 0% interest, Gary. I don't care. That's not where you put your money. You put it where the money is, and that's the cows. That cow generates you $4,000 in gross income. That's where it starts. Rent a facility. Start out with that. Start building. Phase in. Work with a lot of different expansions. With a gentleman this morning that we did a farm expansion and a transition to the next generation of son and daughter. And he's told me today it's working extremely well. And that's because the family works together well. But they're phasing in. The young people are buying the cattle now. And when they start to build some equity, they're going to buy 40 acres in the buildings. Mom and dad are going to hold on to the land and the machinery. So you just buy slowly. You put your money where the most productive assets are. And you have patience. I get all the time asked to do farm transfers. I said, well, first of all, it's going to take a year before we put things together because we need everybody's balance sheets and cash flows. And then once we put it together with a young couple, young person, it's going to take 10 years before maybe you own all the cattle. Before you can start buying some of their hard assets like machinery, land, buildings. Land ought to be the last thing. I mean, that's a terrible investment. Don't get me wrong. There's people in here who own a lot of land. They bought it at the right time. But for young people starting out, don't stick your money in land yet. Rent it. Get arrangements made. Because it's going to take 10 years. In 10 years, you might own all the cattle. And I'll tell you what, you do that balance sheet every year and you watch those assets grow. That's really important. Because sometimes it isn't just the wage you get, it's watching that balance sheet grow that makes a difference. All right, financing. Gary, you just told me it's $10,000 to $25,000 invested. Where am I going to get the money? How many people out of high school or college have $2 million sitting in their bank account? You?
Not mine.
Not on yours? I know that. You just aren't going to have it. So where do you start? Farm Service Agency, USDA. Do we have any FSA folks in the room? All right. That's a great place. And here's what they can do for you. FSA has $300,000 available for beginning farmers. That means you haven't, at least for the last 3 years, filed a Schedule F. Nice thing about it is, for cattle and machinery, there's 15-year amortization and interest rates, at least as of last week when I talked to the FSA office, is 3.75%. Did you get that? Locked in, 15 years. That a good deal? Sure is. You see what the Fed did this last week? Last week, they bumped the rates again. And they're going to do it 3 more times by the time we get to the end of 2019. But that's pretty, and you know what? You can borrow 1-to-1. If you have $300,000 worth of cattle, you can borrow $300,000. You go to a lender of any sort, whether it be a bank, farm credit, credit union, it's probably going to be about 75% loan to collateral. FSA will do it for 1-to-1. But remember, what do you got to have? Balance sheet, cash flow, projection, plan. In fact, when it comes time to buy real estate, or if you do, there's another $300,000 there. That's a good deal. And that interest rate's even a little less. And that can be locked in for 20, 25, 40 years. Wow, nice deal. Now, you always got to ask yourself how old you're going to be in 40 years. And I'm not suggesting that it's going to take you that long to pay it off. But you know what it does? It stretches the amortization out, makes your principal payments low. The cash flow works. How about other lenders out there? You've got guarantees that lenders can deal with. Again, banks, Farm Credit, whoever. And the guarantee is good for what? $1.4 million. Wow. What does that mean, Gary? That means that an individual can borrow $1.4 million and the lender has only got a 10% risk of losing that because the rest of it's guaranteed. Now, don't expect to walk into a bank tomorrow and say, Gary told me I can get $1.4 million, so write me a check. Obviously, you got to put it all together. And again, it's going to be about 70% loan to value in situations like that. And that's a combination of real estate, personal property as well. But again, cash flow's got to work, but that has worked out very well. A lot of lenders have used that program. It's been extremely helpful. Again, cattle, machinery, real estate, all of those items can be used. So you got to do your homework. You got to do a business plan, young people. Those of you that would like to bring somebody into the farm, they need to have a business plan. Business plan means what? This is my goals. This is what I want to do. This is what I'm anticipating this year. This is what I'd like to be in 5 years. Just thinking ahead a bit is really what you're doing. Having that goal. And the balance sheet. I'm sorry if I keep repeating that. But I ask all of you to think about, when's the last time you've done your balance sheet? You need to do that on an annual basis. I don't want to look at it this year. It'll look really bad, Gary. I don't care. Do it. Teach the young folks the importance of it. Cash flow, realistic numbers. Don't put some numbers down that are out in left field. I'm expecting $25 milk next year. Oh, really? God bless you. That ain't going to happen. And you cash flowed at 16. And how about the logic? Oh, I'm going to only have a 5% cull rate on my herd. How do you suppose a lender looks at that? I mean, don't do it for the lender. Do it for you. Right? Make sure it's realistic. Surprises happen. Things do occur. I thought this chart was very interesting the other day, and I thought I'd bring it along. It's probably, those in the back can't see it, but you can see the ladder effect. Huh? And what this is these are herds of 20 to 49 cows, up to 100, 200, and that's what's going around. Now, this is cost of production, and the green is feed cost, which is one of the largest costs. The blue is, the cropping cost is the green, feed is the blue, labor is the yellow, and then we go to capital investment, machinery, and so on and so forth, and then other expenses. Up here, the smaller herds is $28 a hundred, the cost of production. Now, I think, now this is from University of Wisconsin, Madison. I'm sure there's some organic herds in here, all right? That's what costs. But look at the costs, 21, 20, 18, 18, 17. Can you do better than that? That's my question for you. Here's people that can do better than that, folks, out of the same group. These are the top people. I always tell dairy producers, you got to be a top third dairy producer. And some of you will say, well, yeah, but there's got to be bottom third producers, and that's fine. Those are the folks that didn't come to a session like this at Expo. They can be the bottom third. You folks be the top third. Because look at here, it doesn't matter what size of farm you have. Look at the cost, it's pretty much the same right across there. And the consultants that I work with will tell you it's about $1,650 to $1,750 cost of production. Guess what? That's where all of those herds, and it doesn't matter what size you are. You got the message? You decide what works for you. You decide what fits in your lifestyle. It can work. The transition plan. Those of you that want to transfer that farm to the next generation, and I always say you got to start by the time you're 55, and people say, come on, Gary, I just got it where I want it, now you want me to give it away. No, I'm not asking you to give it away. I'm telling you that's when you need to start. Because if you start at 55, how old are you going to be in 10 years? Yeah. And young people need to be in their mid-20s, maybe mid-30s. Sit down with a lot of families, that type of arrangement occurs, and actually non-family members. Sometimes it's a little difficult to find a match. I get farms that want to bring somebody in 1 week, and 2 weeks later, then I got somebody that wants to get into it. It's nice to have that when it happens. But it's got to be written. Got to be an exit plan. Oh, that's really great. We sit down and we have an agreement of how to put this farm together, and I bring you in, and at the same time, we've got a clause in there how you want to get out. But you know what? You have to have that clause in there when everybody's talking to one another, because if it ever gets to the point where people aren't talking to one another, it's nice to be able to look through the document at page 25 and it says this is the way we get out. I don't like that when it happens, but it happens. Have a consultant. I'll do consultant work like that. There are other great consultants out there who do the same thing. What does a consultant do? Consultant sits down and does the balance sheets for everybody. People exiting, people coming in. Consultant does the cash flows and helps with the structure. John, you've done a lot of that in the past. Then you get your accountant involved. And the accountant is important because now all those documentations you put together, the accountant looks at that and says, oh, this will work, or here's another idea. Or the other thing that's real important is what's the tax ramification? Because the last thing I want to do is structure something. In about 5 years, I find out the IRS is out there with their hand and says, well, thank you very much. Because the way you put this together, you owe me this kind of money. Boy, you don't want to do that. So you get the blessing of the accountant, and then you bring these folks in. And you say, oh boy, I don't know if I like dealing with attorneys. Katie, how we doing? Tell you what, you ever heard the term? It's not written. It's not said. And what we do is bring all those financial documents and discussions. And by the way, this 1 year march to get this transition plan done, we meet about every 6 weeks. Somebody takes notes. Because about halfway through this, somebody will say, well, I thought we said. And someone goes back through the notes and says, no, according to this, this is what we said. Now, we can change it. And remember, the couple that's in the position that want out in the future, they can make any decision they want, basically. But make sure that the accountant says this makes sense, and the attorney will now help with structure, and you bring all that documentation into the attorney. And what both couples, both people, both parties would like. I have three. We have any attorneys in here? Nah, they're probably working today doing something else. Why? There'll be some here at Expo. I've got 3 qualifications for a good ag attorney. Number 1, they need to understand agriculture. Number 2, they need to understand farm families. Because I don't care if you're a corporate attorney, you got to understand farm families. Because there's some mechanics that go on there. And thirdly, they need to understand taxes. Structured right. Because the last thing I want is somebody writing a big fat check and saying,
Ooh, okay.
that's wrong. We want to keep as much of that
It's like a green light, green means go,
possible.
right?
Did you play with the clicker or do you want to use that?
That's the way we do a transition plan.
Does it enter your slides?
I'll probably use it
And you got to have
because
all
I've
parties
done
that
it
are in
before.
agreement.
So
At least some
All right,
understand
so that can go back in your pocket.
Okay.
But those things will continue to happen. So who else? Young people, find yourself a mentor. What's a mentor?
okay,
A mentor is a Bob Hagenow that understands dairy very well.
I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna
And
break.
then you can sit down with Bob on a regular
Break
basis, and
everything.
Bob says,
So how do you turn
you know,
this on?
here's the
and off?
things you need to think about. Here's a farm you need to go on. That's a mentor. A mentor is a good dairy producer that puts his arm around a young person and says, I want to show you this business. I want to show you what it's about. I want you to follow me around for a day. I want you to be here for 2 weeks during the summer and follow us around and see what we do. And a young person needs to ask those kinds of questions. You need to have your mind open. Why do you do that? Ask a lot of why questions. And be like Al Kepke and say, what do I need to do this morning to make my cows a little more comfortable? You need to have a good neighbor that you can spend some time with. That neighbor might be 100 miles away. That neighbor might be on the West Coast. But find somebody that you can take and be at their farm. And I'm talking to young people now. Spend some time in a different part of the United States or a different part of the world. I've talked to young people that have been in New Zealand and spent a month there, and wow, they said, I opened my mind up to things I never thought about before. Or go to Europe, see what they're doing.
Was funny. I told her, I was like, what
How about a peer group?
can't do
I
this
think
anymore.
this is
Can
an
we just put it up
absolute
there by
powerful
ourselves? Stand right
type
up.
of group of people that not near enough
Like
people
me
take
now.
advantage of.
You're getting picked up.
This is getting some like farmers together. Now, it can be sensitive because we can talk about financials. And you ought to be able to work with somebody that keeps their mouth shut, huh? Doesn't blab it all over in the neighborhood. And I know groups that are not necessarily within 5 miles. Some people might be within 50 miles or 100 miles, but they get together on a regular basis. And you know what they compare? They compare with how they're doing. They compare the last quarter, what the financials look like. What's my cash flow? I just got a report here yesterday from a Nitsky Valpol firm in Pigeon, Michigan. They take about 45 herds and do a very nice analysis, about 20 different expenses. And the difference between the top third and the average herd is only a nickel here and a dime there in expenses. And you know what? If I can sit down with a top third dairy producer on a peer group meeting, and I know that he or she has got 10 cents less cost in cropping per hundredweight, I want to know why. What are you doing? How'd you do that? And I can go all the way down that list, and it's just shaving off 3 cents here and a nickel there. And yet the production is right up there. And I don't have to tell you about components today because they're extremely important. How do you get the components there? How come your somatic cell count's only 80? I was on an 800-pound farm the other day and I had 80 somatic cell count. Wow. And it's not because they had a lot of cows in sick bay either. They just know how to do it right. How'd you like to have those people as a peer group? Asking questions. And how about young people? Can you tag along? Can you sit and listen? Pretty important. There's some organizations out here that do a nice job too. Professional Dairy Producers Wisconsin, DBA, other farm organizations. They do a lot of this mentoring and getting young people together too. And go to these meetings. You ought to go at least 2-3 times a year to get out doing something, just like you're doing today. And Ben, you can't start soon enough. Attaboy, shake your head. But they're there. I'll put a plug in for this. Professional dairy producers who spend the board of directors were dairy farmers. 7 years ago said we need a program to help dairy producers understand their financials better. Finally, a program was put together. Dr. David Cole, myself, Steve Schwar with Compere, and Dick Whitman from Idaho, runs 20,000 acres of land, put together a 3-part program for dairy producers on financial literacy. Look it up on the website, people, on financial literacy. If you've got young people, particularly, and I don't care what age you are, come on to the session. It's going to cost you a little money to do it. But there's been a lot of time. In fact, what you do is you do an assessment. You sit down and you assess just what your knowledge is. Not to embarrass anybody, but just to make sure that puts you in the right level. See, it used to be you took care of your cattle, you took care of your crops, and you were successful. Some of you remember that? That's all you had to do. Today, unless you understand the numbers, it ain't going to work. Margins are way too tight. You realize in 1980, price of milk was $13.50 a hundred. Cost of production was $6. What'd you do with all your money? All right, grant you interest rates were a little high, but tell me when the blue harvester silos went up. That's what some folks did with their money. It worked. That was the management. I mean, Harvester brought us harvesting first crop hay in May instead of the 4th of July. Give them credit for that. But get some of that training. This dairy grazing apprenticeship, if you're interested in that type of program in milking cows, I'd highly, highly recommend you contact that organization. They have herds in the Midwest and in the East. And they help young people get into the grazing industry, milking cows that way. And the cost per cow is not going to be $25,000 like I showed you. It's going to be a lower number because you don't have near the investment out there. But you got to like doing it that way. And granted, in Wisconsin in January, you're not growing a whole lot of grass. Now, if you're in Missouri, it's maybe a little different story. But if you're interested in that type of dairy farming, that's a terrific organization. I've been on their farms. They do a nice job with that. And it's not just organic grazing, it's regular grazing and grass-fed milk as well. But it's a terrific apprenticeship program. And don't forget about the extension and universities. Those people are a great deal of help as far as training and programs. You really got to get some education on the other side of high school. But you can't start then. You really need to start early. I mean, 4-H, FFA, tremendous programs. And I hope the young people are taking it. Probably that's why you're here today, because you've got that program available to you. Get to know your lenders. I don't care what age you are. Get to know who's out there that has the money availability. Get to know the accountant, the veterinarian, the nutritionist. The nutritionists are probably on the dairy more than anybody else. Tag along with them, young people. Follow them around the barn, see what they're doing. Ask them questions. Why? How come? Challenge them on that. and the list goes on and on. But these are people, young people, that you need to deal with. Now we've got a really different challenge in our industry that we haven't seen, and it's occurred in the last 2 years, and maybe that's been rectified here with the trade agreement that was done yesterday. Did you hear about it? It's now the U.S., M for Mexico, and CA for Canada. I guess it replaced NAFTA, is what it does. Now we'll see where that goes. I guess because Canada wanted to be able to send cars to the United States without a tariff, Canada said, well, you can bring some milk up this way, that Class 7 milk as they call it. So we'll just see where that goes. I know it's got to go under a lot of agreements, and Congress has got to take a look at it. But 2 years ago, used to be you always had 6 people wanting to pick up milk on a farm. Today, boy, you got to be careful. Make sure you're sending good quality milk because you don't want to be cut off. Because now milk plants say, hey, I'm full. So as a young person, before you start buying that first herd of cattle, make sure you go talk to a milk plant and that they'll take your milk. Now, you know, some people might look at what's going on right now in the dairy industry and say, well, I don't know. I think the sun is setting. Huh? Other people that want to do a good job in this industry, in this business of caring for cattle, look at that picture and say, I think that's sunrise. And I'm going to tell you, that picture was taken at 4 a.m. Katie, how are we doing? How many minutes do we have left? 13 minutes? That's right on time for questions, Katie. I just unloaded a lot of thoughts, young people. I just unloaded a lot of thoughts on those of you that are adults, bringing on that next generation. What questions do you have for me? Now, I don't want anybody walking out of this room, David, that haven't asked a gut-wrenching question. And somebody say, I wish Sipiorski would have said that. We have a gentleman here. Go ahead.
Gary, many years now we've had price contracts.
Hang on. Wait. Katie's got a. We're recording this, so go ahead.
Thank you. For many years now, we've had price contracts for our milk.
Yep.
You know, and a lot of businesses in town, any manufacturing plant, whatever, they all have contracts with their suppliers, other vendors. Do you think in the future there may be production contracts with a plant?
Question is about production contracts with the dairy producer has with the plant.
Wherever he sends his milk to.
Wherever he sends his milk to. Here you go, Katie. Yeah, I think that's happening right now. Now, anybody from Indiana here? In the back? Okay. I'm just simply going to say this. What type of arrangement has Walmart made with the dairy producers in Indiana? I know it's a sensitive topic because, you know, Dean Foods is no longer supplying that milk, and there were, 100 dairy producers that no longer, or had to look for a different place. But what Walmart has done with that plant is they're doing contracts. And I know of other places around the U.S. that contracting is taking place. So I think we will see more of that. I don't think you'll see many milk plants own cows because that's a 365-day-a-year thing. But I do think we're going to see not vertical integration, but horizontal integration where contracting will take place. And I think that will become more popular as time goes on. What else? Yes, sir, John.
We spent a lot of time talking about balance sheets, both tax-based balance sheet and market. If we assume a market
Okay, that's an excellent question, and we're just going to talk about market balance sheets, John, without getting into the nitty-gritty of the account end of it. Right now, and for a long time, there have been some lenders that have marked cattle at about $1,200 to $1,500 on the balance sheet. Now, some dairy producers felt that they ought to move that to $1,800 and $2,000, but lenders have cautioned producers of the fact that values do come down. And just think what your balance sheet would do if I had cattle worth, I put them on my sheet at $2,000 and today I put them at $1,200. That $800 times how many cows going to shrink that balance sheet? Did any cow move out of the barn? I still got the same number of cows. I was on an auction yesterday, Twin B, up in Marathon. Some of you might know the two brothers up there. And I watched the auction for about 4 hours. And yeah, there were some high-class cows that went for $8,000. But I'm just guessing now that probably the sale average too, and this is high-quality, good genomics animals. Right now, I think you'll find lenders, John, pricing those cattle between $1,200 and $1,500, and that's realistic. And I don't like to see those numbers being bounced around. Now, these guys up here in Marathon took 30 animals before the sale, a week before the sale, that they thought were bottom animals, and they just sent them out the door. So this was just a lot of good animals. And again, these were probably averaging 2,000, and I might be wrong, up probably a little higher than that. But I think that's where lenders will be with that. And I think you need to be consistent with that because you know you can take a herd of cattle, and yeah, you might have some cows that are going to sell for $1,800, but you're going to have some that are going to sell at cull price. So you need to average it out and be realistic with that. Because I don't like to see those balance sheets moving around just because the asset value. And if I had cattle on the balance sheet at $1,200 and I bumped them to $1,800, well, I feel really good because my cattle are worth more. That's not called earned equity. That's called appreciated equity. So just stay away from that. Great question. Who else? Yes, sir.
If someone wanted to start a dairy farm and they had the absolute choice of anywhere based on taxes, climate, type of land, politics, every possible characteristic one can imagine, where would you say would be the best place in the country to do it?
Oh, see, that's what I call a gut-wrenching question. That is an excellent question. Where would you start? Where would you get involved? I want to go. I know we're in Wisconsin. Yeah, I know. Go where the cows are welcome. Go where the milk plants are that you got a place. Now, I'm going to be biased about the Midwest here because we got a tremendous amount of feed availability. Wisconsin's got, 5.8 million people? Ohio's got 10 million people. California's got 38 million people that don't like cows, other than the 2,000 dairy producers that have cows. But those would be the things that I'd look at. Where are cows being welcomed today? Wisconsin still likes cows, Minnesota. Michigan is starting to build some milk plants, so I'd be a little cautious there. Indiana certainly is a possibility. I tell you what, right now there's a lot of dairy cows taking a hard look at Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, New Mexico. Those are all choices. But I want to know where cows are welcome, and I know I've got a long-term contract and there's plenty of milk plants to take that milk. South Dakota, there's a milk plant there, Queen Valley. They're expanding a plant out there. They've got 44 patrons right now along the 29 corridor. Now that's going to be probably some 1,500 cow, 1,000 cow type dairies is what you're looking at there. So that's a good question. That's where I'd go. Bob?
Since this is World Dairy Expo, same question. Is there any other place in the world right now, any other country in the world that you are seeing as meeting the qualifications that you cited here?
Yeah. You hear a lot of talk about New Zealand. It's a nice place to milk cows. Challenge in New Zealand is that the land is very expensive and their debt load has become quite high, is what it has. I mean, there are some places like the Ukraine and Eastern Europe that would be great places to milk cows. But what's my problem there, folks? War. The government structure really is a challenge to be able to milk cows there. I want to go someplace where I know we've got stability in the world. I mean, so South America has been talked about, but again, boy, you know, Argentina, the peso is doubling every month from an inflation standpoint. Anybody from Argentina in here? Well, we got people around. Boy, it's, I mean, so you got to find a place with stability, Bob, of the economy, and a place to go with your milk. I mean, Europe, we've got a lot of people that are coming this way from Europe and have in the last 20 years. So the U.S. still is a great place to milk cows, but you got to know and you got to be smart enough. You got to have a four-legged milk stool. I don't care where you go. That's the important thing. Canada, well, that's quite an interesting system up there, but let's see. The cost to get into the system is about $25,000 a cow just for the quota. So I don't know if that's a real good choice there. You got to have a pretty hefty pocketbook just to have the right to milk cows. And anybody from Canada here? Welcome. I mean, we've had some of your folks down here telling us how good your system is. But how many cows you milk there? You're a steel worker. A wannabe farmer.
Well, I live in farmland. My daughter is actually the one interested, so that's why we're here. She goes down 4-H, and
Ooh.
I'm down for a visit.
Good. Well, welcome. We really want to welcome you down here. I'm glad you're going to take a little of our milk now again.
Yeah, the farm she works at's not too happy about that.
Yeah. We're still good neighbors. John, you got a last question.
Okay, so there's probably 20, 30, 40 wannabe dairy farmers in this room. Very impressed with your presentation and the dynamics of it. Where do they start? What's the first 1 or 2 steps that you would advise the 20 or 30 people in this room that they're motivated by what they heard from you today. What do they do when they go home?
All right, what they want to do, the first thing you want to do, and I'm glad you brought that up, Department of Agriculture, Trade, Consumer Protection in Wisconsin has a special list of wannabe dairy producers and producers that want to bring young people in. If there's anybody in this room that is a young couple that would like to get hooked up with an existing producer, come talk to me later. I do have people that have talked to me that would like to do that. Talk to your local lenders. Ask them that question. But again, DATCAP keeps a list here in Wisconsin. And I think if you look at other government agencies in other states, you find the same thing. Do you have any other suggestions, John? No. I mean, Bob, I know you stay pretty close with things as well. But I'd start there with those organizations. All right, with that, we have come to an end. And I thank you for being here very much.
Just a reminder, if you can turn in your evaluation forms at the back desk, that'd be great.